there's been a general lack of attention on the problem of nuclear weapons across not only, I would say, Russia, but also in Europe and in the United States for many years. It's important to know like the numbers, right? That's important to remember that these still exist out there and what are the effects, right? It's also important to think about the human costs, not only of a potential war, but the human costs of the nuclear weapons production complex, which is something that has been a little bit forgotten, like, the health and environmental risks to people ongoing. And also, what is the cost in terms of what else could we be spending this money on, right? Think about that. After the New START Treaty was finished in 2010 and the US and Russia brought down their warhead numbers to 1550, right? There was an attempt to talk about what should the next treaty look like. And the Trump administration basically made a last-ditch attempt at this in 2019, 2020, didn't get anywhere. The Biden administration was starting to talk with Russia about this. What should the next treaty to bring down the nuclear risks look like? And then that was derailed by the war, of course. So the one big thing that would be helpful right now is for the US and Russia to think very seriously about the end of the New START Treaty, which is happening on February 6th next year, right? So less than a year left before this treaty ends. So the New START Treaty is the abbreviation for the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which was an agreement signed between the US and Russia and ratified by the two countries that limits the number of nuclear warheads that they can point at each other, so that they can deploy at any time, right? And that caps it at 1,550 nuclear warheads. At the same time, it also caps the number of missiles, whether in silos in the ground or at sea, right, on submarines, or the number of bombers that they have for these missions. So at 700. So this is in a long line of arms control treaties dating back to the Interim Agreement in the 1968 Interim Agreement between US and Soviet Union at the time, putting modest incremental halts, right, in the arms race. And this is a treaty that is really foundational to the US-Russia relationship, but also the entire global security structure. And I should also mention that it is really important for nuclear non-proliferation, because under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the US, Russia, and all the other nuclear powers have a responsibility to gradually disarm. And for a lot of countries who are standing by and saying, well, they're not disarming, why should we not develop our own nuclear weapons, right? It's an important signal that the US and Russia are still thinking seriously about bringing their numbers down. Now, the challenge here, of course, is that China is also increasing its nuclear forces slowly. And how do the three countries think about that? How do they construct a new treaty that takes that into consideration is going to be an important question. But I should reemphasize that all of the nuclear weapons powers do have a responsibility, a legal responsibility under this treaty to bring down their nuclear forces gradually. So important first step is for the US and Russia to find a way to have a follow-on treaty to the New START Agreement. The question is, does Trump have the energy and the focus to negotiate with Russia a follow-on treaty after that? Because he has many goals, right? He has many ideas many priorities that he's flitting back and forth about. He's repeated his call for denuclearization multiple times, right? So it's not something that was just randomly on his mind when he was speaking to the crowd at the World Economic Forum meeting at Davos, right? He is actually thinking about this quite seriously. The question is, can he appoint people who share his agenda? And can he reach an agreement with Putin that is actually, a substantial decrease from that number, or even just a political agreement to keep those numbers in place for now, right? Even that would be helpful. Now, the other concern to think about in Europe, for example, is this talk about sharing nuclear weapons, right? And I think in the rush since the beginning of the Trump presidency to improve Europe's own defenses, right? A lot of these proposals have been not quite fully fleshed out. And I think it's time to slow down, to talk about the proposals a little bit more seriously, look at what the French President Macron has been actually saying about France's attitude. It isn't going to be putting French bombs on Polish soil, right? That's not the proposal. Looking at what these proposals are with the new German government, for example, and taking them a little bit more seriously, but a little bit more with a bit of caution, right? And seeing what is necessary and not racing towards I don't think any of the countries are really going to be in a position to be racing towards their own nuclear capability, right? So making sure that this loose talk is not necessarily where we're headed in the next few years. I mean, I think it was very difficult at the end of the Biden administration to predict. The essential problem is that there's not enough time left to negotiate a full-fledged treaty, right? So the process for negotiating a treaty isn't just two teams sitting down at a table and passing numbers back and forth. They have to go back to their headquarters. They have to ask the military, does this work? What do you think about this proposal? So it's an iterative process over years. Usually takes 2-3 years to do at the best, right? So it was very unlikely that the two sides would reach a new agreement before the deadline, right? What is promising, however, is that the Trump administration, President Trump himself has been talking about denuclearization. So he has his own interest in it, which is contrary to the inclinations of most of the nuclear policy experts in the Republican Party, who have not been so keen on following agreement. So because his opinions run against those of his own party, it's important to see who he picks to help negotiate this deal, whether those people that he picks are have the connections within, have the knowledge and the connections within the national security establishment here in Washington to carry this program forward, right? So I'm more optimistic than I was 2 months ago, but it's still not from a very high level. So President Trump has said alongside his statements about nuclear weapons, he's noted the costs. And coming into office, I think he's seeing the estimates. For example, the Congressional Budget Office here in the United States said the cost of nuclear weapons, this is 2 years ago, so not including some inflation that's happened in the last 2 years, would be $750 billion over the next 10 years. So the total cost of the nuclear weapons that the US is building right now and operating, we estimated a few years ago, it was $2 trillion over 30 years. So this is big money, right? So he's thinking about where are we going to get funds for the conventional side of the military, where are we going to get money for other social programs, which the Republican Party may or may not want to support, but also thinking about tax cuts, which is also something that the Republican Party is thinking about paying for, right? All of these costs are something that's on his mind. So when he came back into office, he was probably briefed about this and he's thinking about this. I think that he also has had a strong interest in the nuclear problem since the 80s, right? So it's documented that he, has talked on the record with reporters about this problem and expressed his own interest in it. So I think it's a recurring lifetime concern of his. It hasn't been at the forefront for a long time, right? So I think he has some personal investment in the problem. He's seeing the financial cost. He's aware of the risks present. But the only question is, how high does it rank among all of his other priorities?
China's going to be at 400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military and I'm going to be meeting with China. We were trying to de-escalate nuclear, and I was in a position where Russia had agreed and China had agreed we were going to start, and then we had a rigged election, so that never took place. As soon as things settle down, I'm going to have that conference, primarily with China and Russia, because those are the two that really are out there. And we're going to have them spend a lot less money, and we're going to spend a lot less money. And I know they're going to do it. They agreed to it. We were talking about denuclearizing, and President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. You could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and they're building nuclear weapons, and China's building new nuclear weapons. Hopefully there'll never be a time when we need those weapons. If there's ever a time when we need nuclear weapons, like the kind of weapons that we're building and that Russia has and that China has to a lesser extent but will have, that's going to be a very sad day. That's going to be probably oblivion.
Do you see that as a separate conversation?